this is gonna be a bit scuffed, but I'll take the time to do it. So some rogues on this server have been asking specifically about PvP and whether ranking is worth it as a rogue. And to answer that question, first and foremost, yes, ranking as a rogue currently is worth it, um, and for a couple of reasons. So we'll go over the class set first. So the blue set's kind of on par with Night Slayer, less so on the set bonus um, area, but when it comes to like the stats on the gear, um, the big lack or the big lacking factor that the PvP sets have is the agility, right? So you're not getting anywhere near as much dodge value from the agility conversion. Um, but PvP gear has, decent secondary stats. Attack power isn't bad. It's less favorable towards playing a dagger spec, but it works pretty well for hemo, combat swords, or maces. Basically those two specs. Another underrated probably aspect of the PvP gear is that the armor values on them are all high. Armor is your only defense against, well, it's one of your like passive defenses against physical damage. Keep in mind it doesn't factor against things like bleeds. Bleeds ignore armor. And the same goes for the epic gear. The epic gear also has increased armor value over most gear at its item level or slightly higher. The epic PvP gear overall fixes that issue of agility not being present. There's plenty of agility on the gear itself. Um, the armor kind of takes the place of the strength itemization that most gear has as well, or in terms of like PvE tier, which isn't the worst thing, right? Armor being is essentially a PvP stat anyway. Um, and then some of the pieces of tier or sorry PvP gear, so your legs, your chest, your helmet, is also both have two secondary stats or in terms of itemization on them, and that's pretty good. You don't get basically that until Bloodfang chest, and then later AQ40 and Nax itemization pieces, or Nax pieces with that itemization. So overall, the Marshal, Grand Marshal, or Field Marshal gear is slightly better than Tier 2, but it's worse than the stuff that comes after that. So it's it's alright, like which is why I mentioned earlier, ranking is fine for the time being. Uh, Mainly prior to Phase 5, you'll use all of it, but after Phase 5, you'll have replaced all of it, including the weapons. So the weapons are the biggest things from PvP. It's why you have to rank 14 for it. So the Dirk or the Razor if you're Horde, the dagger will last you basically until King's Fall for PvP. Um, it's basically got the best stats you could ask for a PvP weapon. Uh, Attack speed used to matter more, but for classic, it's not mandatory, or it's not really a thing that'll affect your backstab damage or ambush damage. So the longsword or the slicer, right? The main hand weapon for PvP is also pretty good. Um, this will basically get replaced in AQ, though the AQ main hand sword or ancient Kiraji Ripper is more or less equal to this. So if you don't push for rank 14, then once AQ is released, you can get a weapon of basically the same value. Um, I will say for PvP though, the Grand Marshal's Longblade is more preferable due to the slower weapon speed, the higher low end damage. So your auto attack damage, especially if you're playing combat swords, is going to be a huge portion of your damage. So dual wielding something like this is actually not a bad idea. And I mean that's really all of the notable weapons from PvP. You can use the Swift Blade as a dagger spec rogue because you don't have to wear an offhand dagger, and this has the same exact stats as the PvP dagger, but it's got slightly better weapon damage, and the, it's faster, so it'll proc offhand poisons a little bit more frequently. So PvE gear, um, because classic is inherently PvE oriented, it's worth mentioning the tier sets. So tier one is a tier one is a pretty average set for PvP. It's got agility, so you're gonna get crit and dodge from it. The set bonuses, on the whole, are mostly PvP oriented. The 5 set being the most notable one, giving you the 10 extra energy. Uh, Works well for Seal Fate, though most rogues are probably going to be playing either prep daggers or hemo daggers, or not hemo daggers, but hemo in general. Uh, it kind of just helps you keep your stun locks a little more clean. It doesn't really allow you to do much more than that, uh, unless you're playing Seal Fate. But tier 1 is not really anything special. You can kind of mix and match with some later sets for the extra energy bonus, but and at the end, you won't be using this in phase 6 for the most part. So tier 2. Tier 2 isn't really that great of a set in general. Like, the most noteworthy parts of tier 2, the 3 set. Um, so you can get the basically a little less unluck, basically, when it comes to proccing your crippling poison on your opener. The 8 set is okay damage, but it can proc on things like gouge. So in a 1v1 situation, you do run the risk of breaking your gouges. The gloves, the disarm immunity isn't bad. It's great versus warriors. But if a warrior sees that you're wearing Bloodfang gloves, he's not gonna try and disarm you, or he shouldn't. Um, Stat wise, the set's okay. It's got plenty of agility. Some pieces have less agility than Night Slayer, uh, and then some pieces have dodge on them, which, I mean, for PvP, that's fine. But overall, it's a pretty middle of the pack set. Bone Scythe. Bone Scythe is actually pretty good. Um, Arguably, it's the second best set you'll ever get for PvP. Um, Mix and match, it can be part of the best. Um, the the stats on it are pretty good. This set does trade out quite a bit of the agility that you would normally have given from a gear set for attack power, and you don't really lose that much crit, but you definitely lose dodge from that, which isn't the worst thing. But the set bonuses where, for PvP specifically, you start seeing some of the less preferable things to other sets. So the two pieces isn't isn't really that amazing. It's okay. I mean, more self healing for a class that has none. Um, the 4 piece is pretty good. Hemorrhage and Sinister Strike specs will get pretty good value out of that. Backstab alright is alright too. Um, the 6 piece does nothing in PvP. The 8 set's better in like an organized situation where targets are living long enough to basically get those eviscerates off, or you know, to warrant using something like this. Um, but I mean, there are some solid pieces in here, and it's possible to use it. Use some of the pieces at least in the most optimal of sets. So that leaves the AQ40 set. At the end of things, the 5 piece Death Dealer is actually the best PvP set for damage. Um, 15% increased damage on Eviscerate from the 5 set bonus is really big. I mean, that puts total damage increase from Eviscerate on most specs at 30%. Even more if you're playing combat with the aggression talent. And this set has plenty of agility. So you know, whereas Bone Scythe loses agility on the chest and boots, Death Dealer remains with that. So there's some dodge value out of that as well in terms of like and crit value. So through and through, you'll wear 5 piece Death Dealers, and then the other pieces you can basically throw in tier 3 for 4 set ring, and then gloves, belt, bracers for your basically energy efficiency or combo point efficiency. So back to weapons or PvE weapons specifically. So Molten Core, uh, Perdition's Blade, third best dagger in the game for a dagger spec rogue. Corehound Tooth, second best offhand for a dagger rogue. It's Corehound Tooth and the High Warlord slash Grand Marshal off or dagger, or even the Swiftblade are really comparable to each other. Like it's 2 stam versus 8 attack power. Corehound Tooth will obviously give you more offhand poison procs. Um, Brutality Blade, for a while this will be good as an offhand, but if you're getting rank 14, you don't need this. The High Warlord weapons are better because they're faster, and I mean offensive stat value. The High Warlord weapons have both offensive and defensive, whereas Brutality Blade just has is basically pure offensive, but it's less throughput than the PvP weapons. Um, Viscag, it's a stepping stone weapon. It's great for PvE. For PvP, it's not as amazing when there are other options available. So Blackwing Lair, Dragonfang Blade is okay if you don't have a Perdition's Blade, though. If you're in a guild, they might give this to a Protection Warrior over you or a Fury Pro Warrior, uh, maybe even a Hunter if they haven't gotten around to getting a Corehound Tooth or a Brutality Blade. Uh, Maladath, Maladath is okay for riposte builds, uh, but that's if you're just trying to stack as much parry. Um, Claw the Black Drake is decent for Hemo, but it's again really if you don't have anything else, PVE wise, no one's really going for this, so it'd probably be a pretty easy win, or especially if you're Alliance, because most warriors aren't going to want this. Uh, Chromatically Tempered Sword, really good weapon. Great stats, good speed, decent weapon damage, great for combat swords, Hemo. Um, it's not bad as an offhand as well, just due to the stats that it has. AQ40, so Fankris, Ancient Courage Ripper. This and the High Warlord weapon I talked about earlier, or the PvP weapon, are more or less equal. In terms of PvE output, PvP output, like I said, I prefer the PvP weapon, the rank 14 sword, more. But throughput wise, you're gonna get more or less the same value out of it. Um, Cthulhu or Cthulhu. Death Sting is better than Perdition's Blade, so but it's worse than the rank 14 Grand Marshal or High Warlord dagger. So I would put this at more or less equal, but slightly worse. So I would just say, for the sake of like a number ranking, Perdition's Blade is number 3, Death Sting and the rank 14 weapon are both number 2. So like if you don't have rank 14, then this is a very suitable substitute for that. Oh yeah, armaments. So the Pugio is kind of the sort of first replacement for Core Houndtooth in terms of an offhand, though this does require 3 Elementium ingots, and if you're in a raiding guild, odds are they're probably not going to give you 3 Elementium ingots early on for PvP dagger. Um, Pugio is not bad for PvE either, but hunters are probably ahead of rogues in line for receiving an armament, just due to the nature of there's a lot of competition on most melee weapons that they would want outside of the fist weapon, the Slithed Claw. But Pugio is also a very, very good hunter weapon, so um, if you can get it, or if you just buy the ingots, and a guild will probably have no problem giving it to you. It's a decent dagger, nonetheless. So next weapons, we'll start with Geldasad. King's Fall. This is obviously the number 1 dagger for Seal Fate, prep daggers. You know, Grasil, great for Hemo, great for combat swords. Hungering Cold, I mean, the weapon speed on it is great. The stats on it aren't that amazing for PvP. Uh, Weapon skill isn't as applicable in PvP as it is in PvE. Like, it helps against protection warriors, or warriors that are wearing defense or high values of defense, because when a warrior wears over 315 defense, you're gonna need more hit rating to even hit them reliably. Um, but in PvP, your offhand isn't as important in general. Maces, misplaced servo arm is really good. It's good for Hemo. Uh, Slightly worse than a Grasil. For combat maces, obviously, this is what you'll be aiming for. Um, it's a slow weapon. It hits really hard. Yeah, and I mean, mace stuns is very annoying anyway. Harbinger of Doom. This is ideally what you will replace Core Houndtooth with. It's basically the same thing. It's a little bit less attack bar, but agility and hit rating are pretty nice to have. Um, Trinkets, alright, so PvP trinkets are pretty self-explanatory in terms of what, a lot of them are available now. The reflectors are amazing. But as far as like PvE trinkets go, um, Slayer's Crest is really strong for PvP. I mean, it's just a lot of attack power. It's a great way to increase eviscerate damage. Um, Drakefang Talisman is also not too bad. Like, just as a pure a stat stick, it's really good. Um, my favorite PvP trinket, specifically, is the Charm of Trickery from Zul'Gurub. This requires you to kill the bosses on the Edge of Madness and get their basically unique item. And once you have all of them, you merge them with the Voodoo Doll, and you'll get your trinket. This is an amazing weapon for every dagger build. This makes it possible to kill even very geared players in a cheap shot. Um, it's a very threatening trinket when a rogue has this, especially if coupled with Thistletea. Um, that mainly covers most of the gear slots you'll go for capes and rings and things like that. Um, Outside of like tier three ring or outside of like bone scythe ring, there isn't really too much value. Like it's not going to be a difference that you notice, more or less. Enchants, we can go over those real quick. So helm enchants, most people are going to use, or helm and leg enchant rather. Most people use Death's Embrace. Um, if you feel like you need extra stamina, you can continue to use Libram of Constitution for the 100 HP. Um, for Enchanter enchants, these aren't really that difficult to sort of decide. So weapon enchants might be the only thing. So in PvE, Double Crusader, like that's what you'll use. In PvP, um, personally, from you know, from when I PvP'd back in vanilla, and you know how I'll PvP again, I'll probably be dual wielding two 15 agility enchants for non-dagger specs. But if you absolutely feel like you need the Crusader, then using a Crusader on your main hand weapon in PvP is actually pretty good. The proc rate is more reliable on your main hand weapon than it will be on your offhand in PvP, especially if you're using a slow weapon. For daggers, you're mainly going to be using Superior Striking on your main hand, and then 15 agility on your offhand. I have some slight reservations about plus 5 weapon damage, and that's mainly because I would need to go back and sort of check the math on the actual value, because weapon damage and weapon DPS are two completely different things, and 1 point of weapon damage is 3.5 attack power, so technically that means this is only worth about 17 attack power, from, if my math is right, which, it's 4 in the morning, so it might not be. Um, so I would probably use double 15 agility, which using two 15 agility enchants nets you 1% crit, 2% dodge, which for me, primarily liking daggers over basically non-daggers, I feel like that's more value. Um, so back in, or cape enchants, these ones are pretty easy. Stealth, it actually allows you to take a point out of Master of Deception in the sub talent tree. Um, an alternative to that, until phase 5, lesser agility is pretty much default. You could technically go with lesser or greater resistance, but I mean, you won't really notice the difference that much anyway. Same with superior defense. Chest enchants, if you're just strictly a PvPer, 100 HP. If you do both, go with greater stats. Boots enchant, feet. Minor speed, if you're mainly a PvPer. Greater agility if you're PvEing. Ideally, you get two pairs of the same boots. You put one with minor speed and the other with greater agility, and you're pretty much set. Gloves, 15 agility. That one's pretty easy. Until phase 5, greater agility, sorry, superior agility in phase 5 and greater agility in phase, or basically now until phase 5. Embracer enchant, superior stamina. You could have two bracers for superior strength, but you know that depends on whether or not you like gear swapping. But I think that actually basically covers everything in terms of PvP gearing. Um, you know, the stats that you ideally are going for, obviously agility is very important, both offense and defensively. Health or stamina, your typical rogue in decent gear is probably going to have around 4.4 to 4.5k HP before enchants. Enchants you can easily push to 5 or over 5k HP. And that's a really good spot to be in, just due to the fact that a rogue is really hard to kill when they have their cooldowns. So, and that extra HP just means you don't necessarily have to have your target stun locked the full time just to live. Because, I mean, if you played a rogue recently and you have maybe around 3k HP, then, you know, 5 or 6 seconds of a target not being stunned can easily just mean you die. So, late game, rogue is pretty cozy to play, especially once you have that high HP value and enough crit or dodge to play like dagger spec or whatever spec you want to play basically. But I think that more or less covers the broad scope of what I wanted to talk about in terms of rogue PvP gearing. Uh, you know, uh, Thanks for listening, I guess.